Okay, in this question here, we are asked to find the perimeter. This is now 10c of October, November 2016, paper 4.1. Okay, the last part of question 10. We're told that the perimeter of this isosceles triangle is 2q plus q root 3 centimeters. Okay, we got to find the value of y. Okay, so now what we know from this, let's get rid of that. Okay, what we know from this is that if I add these three sides together, I get 2q plus q root 3, which I see that's what I get if I add them together. So making an equation from the sides the way they're given and what's given as a perimeter won't help us here, because if I do 2q, if I add the sides together, I get 2q plus q root 3. So there's some other way we need to link these three sides together with the perimeter. Okay, so what we can do is we can recognize that this is an isosceles triangle. Okay, this one way of doing it. There's actually another way as well. I'll show you both ways. If you drop a perpendicular line, okay, from y, if you drop a perpendicular line from y down to the base, cutting the angle in half, it becomes a right angle triangle because it's isosceles. So you end up with a right angle triangle. Two right angle triangles are identical, and the length from this point to this point will be q times root 3 over 2. And the angle over here will be half of the angle, so that will be y over 2. So what we can do is we can find out, we can link these two sides together with this angle. The right angle triangle, we've got the relationship for SOHCAHTOA trigonometry of right angle triangles. Now the angle that we're given in terms of y and this side are opposites, and this is the hypotenuse of this triangle. So we're dealing with the opposite and the hypotenuse. So we can say that we have the sine of the angle y over 2 is equal to the opposite, which is q times root 3 over 2 divided by q. Okay, so the sine of the angle y over 2 is equal to q times root 3 over 2 times 1 over q. Remember, this is what you do when you're dividing fractions. So the q cancels with the q. So we have the sine of y over 2 is equal to root 3 over 2. So if I want to find y over 2, I've got to press shift sign of root 3 over 2. Now, later on in your maths life, you will realize that root 3 over 2 is something that gives an exact value, which will be 60 degrees. So y over 2 equals 60 degrees, and just to prove it to you, okay, you're going to press shift sign, make sure it's in degree mode, which it is. Make sure there's a D in or R or a G, okay. If it is in another mode, this is how you change it. You press shift and mode. Well, no, sorry, on this calculator. To change it, you just press mode, and then you shift and mode, and then you see you've got degree, radians, gradients. So shift mode, degree, radians, and gradients. We want it to be in degrees, we're going to press 3. That's all you're going to deal with in IT. So you don't have to worry about the rest of it. So you're going to press shift sign, okay, inverse sine of root 3 over 2. Oops. And that will give you 60 degrees, as I mentioned. Okay, so there we have y over 2 is 60. That means this angle here is 60. So that means y, therefore y is going to be 2 times 60. So y is 120 degrees. Now, as I mentioned, that's one way of doing it. Okay, that's one way of doing it. So we can write 120 degrees here as our answer. Another way we could have linked these three sides together is by using the cosine rule. We can say, okay, this is the angle y. So remember the cosine rule is a squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc cosine a. And the a and the angle a are opposites. So because we're dealing with the angle y on this side, let me just get rid of some of this writing now so you can see clearly. Okay. This would be the only way to deal with it if we did not have an isosceles triangle. Okay, then we deal with it in this way. But basically, these are opposites. So that's going to be my angle A, and that's going to be my side A. So we're going to have Q times root 3 squared, that's your A squared, equals B squared, which is Q squared plus another Q squared. B and C are these two sides. Minus 2 times Q times cosine of angle Y. Okay? So you have Q squared times root 3 squared, which is 3Q squared, equals, you got Q squared plus Q squared, which is 2Q squared, minus, you got 2Q squared times cosine Y. Okay, so let's now rearrange this. You'll have 3Q squared minus 2Q squared equals minus 2Q squared cosine Y. So you'll end up with, let's bring it down here. You'll end up with 3Q squared minus 2Q squared, which is 1Q squared, equals minus 2Q squared times cosine Y. If you divide both sides by minus 2Q squared, you'll get Q2 squared over, it'll be a negative, over 2Q squared. Q squared divided by 2Q squared equals cosine Y. So he's got cosine Y is equal to negative half. So therefore, Y is equal to shift cosine of negative half, which later on in your maths life you will realize is equal to 120 degrees. In case you don't believe me, shift cosine negative fraction, let's call it negative, and you're going to have half, 1 over 2. Close bracket, 120 degrees. So our angle is 120 degrees. So there are two ways to deal with this. One of them using the cosine rule, and the other one is to take it as a pair of two equal right angle triangles which are formed by bisecting the angle y. Okay, so the answer is 120 degrees.